All right, well, one of the things we decided to give up for Lent this year was our family question time in the service. Seeing as we were adding Lent liturgy and the candles, we needed something to keep the service from, running too long and being just too busy. It's always tempting to try and cram too much stuff in. It'll come back after Easter, but I've got to say, I've been missing it in the meantime. And so as I was getting ready for today, I decided I couldn't wait another couple weeks. And I thought of a question to lead into the message. That question is, what have you given up for the trade war? I'm sure you thought I was going to say Lent there. We'll get there in a minute. But let's start with something that we are, I think, pretty much almost all of us are doing. Anything you're particularly missing right now?
Traveling to the States.
There we go, yeah.
U.S. strawberries.
U.S. strawberries. Can't get those from Canada in the wintertime. I know one of the things I'm missing are it's little things like my usual brand of cream cheese, our favorite brand of nacho chips, and oddly, baby carrots, because apparently those are always American. But really, not much of a sacrifice on one level, is it? Admittedly, I am selling my own family short. There's a bunch of other things we've switched out. And we're buying a lot fewer things from Amazon. But all told, even then, it's not a major sacrifice. Even as it does help Canadian businesses and workers. And it also, honestly, just makes us feel better at a moment when there's not else a lot to do but wait and decide who to vote for on April 28th and then see what happens after. And we do need things to make us feel better. As I think we're, all joking aside, we are bracing for the possibility that we'll need to make a bunch more sacrifices if this trade war does go on longer. Which does, I think, raise the question of how many of us know what it really means to sacrifice. All of us in this room have lived through or been born into some of the best economic conditions in the history of the world, even as things have certainly gotten tougher over the past 15 to 20 years. And though we're rightly troubled by the trade war, we can definitely thank God that it's now almost 80 years since most Canadians have lived through a total war. Some of us do genuinely know about sacrifice, because of the things we've had to go through in our personal lives, in the lives of our families, or because of the places and situations we lived in earlier in our lives. Some of you may be making significant sacrifices now. We certainly don't know what's going on in everybody's lives. In our context, sacrifice is rarely something we choose voluntarily. Most often, it is something forced on us by external circumstances. For that reason, it's something we rarely feel able to share with others whose circumstances are different, who are not in a place of needing to sacrifice. And I think this presents something of a challenge for anyone who tries to follow Jesus in our time and place. It's a challenge because Jesus clearly describes discipleship, that is following him, learning to become like him, committing ourselves to his mission and his way of life, is framed again and again in terms of sacrifice. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake, for me, will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Now, this is a saying we can't easily get away from because it's recorded in more or less these exact words in 3 out of the 4 Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and here in Luke. And there's no getting away from it in John either, even though he does express it in different words. He uses this idea at least twice explicitly. And it's something, again, that Jesus comes back to in different ways, different angles, repeatedly throughout the Gospels. Yet this saying is really where he lays it out most explicitly. Following me involves sacrifice, sacrifice that is freely chosen, sacrifice that ultimately leads to real life, to eternal life here and in the age to come. And Jesus can ask this from those who would follow him because we know that it is the path that he, the Son of God, has freely chosen. He says it himself just before this. All three versions of this teaching, the whole Christian story from Good Friday and Easter, is about God's Son, one with God eternally, freely choosing to come down to our level, to become exactly like us in all our frailty, and then sacrifice everything to save the world and to save you and to save me. I think this notion of taking up our cross is something that most Christians in a relatively comfortable context like ours struggles with, at least to some degree. I mean, what does it really mean to take up our cross, particularly when we think about what a cross really meant in that time and place? Where do we even start? Is this really necessary? Is Jesus just using hyperbole? Well, we're in the Gospel of Luke this year, and Luke has given us a little bit of help as we figure this out. That's because he's chosen the version of the saying where Jesus says to take up our cross daily. Well, following Jesus may definitely involve some major one-time sacrifices, especially if one happens to be a Christian living in a dangerous environment. For most of us, will involve smaller actions taken daily, one day at a time. Taking up our cross, when looked at from this perspective in Luke, refers to a way of life practiced regularly over an extended period of time. This then helps us break down an idea that I think can so often seem overwhelming into what can be small, achievable goals, taken one day at a time. And I want to do one more thing to make this even a bit easier, and that expression, deny yourself, I don't know, at times can seem perhaps heavy, onerous, or even oppressive, especially if you grew up in a strict religious tradition that required you to sacrifice on a regular basis. For this reason, some other modern translations have rendered these verses a little bit differently. Oops, and my clicker. We'll get back there. Getting a preview. There we go. So, all who want to come after me must say no to themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. Maybe it's just me, but there's something about just that expression, say no to ourselves, that feels a little different. Even as it is definitely something that does go against a lot of what the grain is in our time and place. Where everything from advertising to self-help books tells us to say yes all the time to any desire that we might have. Yet as Jesus says, this act of saying no to ourselves is the way to real life for ourselves and for others. We don't say no to ourselves to destroy ourselves, or because we're somehow inherently evil and must punish ourselves. No, we say no to ourselves to open the door to life. And with this goal in front of us, the simple act of saying no to ourselves seems, I think, an achievable way to make some progress down that otherwise intimidating road of taking up our cross. So what are some practical ways for us to say no to ourselves, daily or regularly? Well, this is where we come back to the question, what have you given up for Lent? As I said at the start of the season, Lent is, again, a bit of a newer thing for most Protestants, other than some Anglicans and Lutherans. It was part of the whole package of legalistic rituals associated with the Roman Church that we gave up at the Reformation. I mean, this is absolutely what was required. And even as we've cautiously brought some of these traditions back, we've been careful to do a couple things. Make sure that they're understood to be voluntary, and emphasize the positive over the negative, that what we take up rather than what we give up. That's generally how these Western Protestants tend to interpret this. You know, as I made Lent part of my personal practice over the years, I've found that giving things up is, in fact, a necessary part of adding other things. Some of this just comes down to the practical realities of time and energy. We can't say yes to everything. We know that. In fact, if we end up saying yes to everything, we end up saying no to at least some of those things anyway, because we cannot do it all or have it all. Saying yes to everything often means we don't have a conscious decision. Some things just drop off the table. At least when we intentionally say no to some things, we are making a conscious choice of what we are taking up and what we are laying aside. Saying no to one thing can allow us to say yes to something else that is perhaps more important or more in keeping with our values. And I've also come to appreciate that there is more to this act of intentionally saying no than just the practical reality of our human limits and limitations. If we take Jesus seriously, then we need to accept that saying no to ourselves is actually an essential part of following him. An essential part of being able to say yes to God and yes to the good we want to do for others and ultimately for ourselves. As I said a moment ago, this can be difficult in a time and place where we have so many options, so many things we can say yes to, and so many people and things around us telling us to say yes to ourselves, no matter what it costs others or no matter what it costs the planet. This can be a difficult thing to do every single day as an ongoing personal commitment. But it's actually much easier to try if we only have to do it for a limited time. You can actually try almost anything if you know you're only going to have to do it for a short time. And 40 days is actually a perfect amount of time because it's not excessively long and therefore more doable, but it's also long enough to start forming a new habit. This has the added benefit that what you try in Lent may be something that you could keep doing for the long term if you find it helpful. At the very least, it strengthens your spiritual muscles. I haven't flat out given up anything for Lent, but I have set some limits. If you see me stuffing my face with sweets at coffee hour, don't worry too much. It's because I've given them up from Monday to Friday for the duration of Lent. I'll maybe try Monday to Saturday next year. I've done that before, it's a lot harder. I also put a half-hour limit on my online news consumption and social media use. I found that helpful. And it does make you stop and like, okay, do I want to read this article? Because if I read this article, I can't read that one. And genuinely, it has stretched me. I have a sweet tooth, which I try to counteract with exercise the rest of the year, and yes, some self-control. And I'm also a news junkie. But both choices require me to say no to myself 5 out of 7 days for one, and every day for the other. And though you don't notice it right away, the longer you keep it up, the better your willpower gets. Even if you slip here and there. Honestly, the most basic way to learn how to say no to yourself is just by saying no to yourself. The more times you do it, the easier it gets. And over time, you find this spills over to other things as well. I found myself becoming a bit more considerate as a driver and as a pedestrian over the past month. Now, as I've said before, this has been a long-term goal for me. and I try to do it year-round. Yet I've noticed, as the month has gone on, that it's just easier to say to myself, no, I'll let them go first. When I'm already a bit more used to saying no to myself in other contexts. Saying no to ourselves when it's done for the right reason, for a Jesus-shaped reason. Well, it can free us up to say yes to others, even if it just starts with small things. I particularly noticed this with one other thing that I often take up during Lent, which is that most traditional form of self-denial, which is fasting. And let me say, I've wrestled with sharing this, particularly because, Jesus said the greatest spiritual benefit from fasting comes from when you don't tell anyone else that you're doing it. So there goes all my Lent points on the floor over here. And to be completely honest, I'm not doing anything remotely impressive or difficult. It's a couple days a week, and I only keep it from my normal breakfast time to my normal dinner time. I'm basically just skipping lunch and not having any snacks. That definitely would not cut it for, say, traditionalist Roman Catholics, particularly Eastern Orthodox Christians. If you actually look at Eastern Orthodox Lent practices, they are hardcore. Or, let's face it, our Muslim neighbors who just finished Ramadan recently. They at least have to go from sunrise to sunset. And that is the fact. There are so many different ways to fast. It can be just cutting certain things out. Maybe just having bread for your midday meal. There is no absolute rule, particularly for us, again, as Presbyterians, Protestants. The idea is that this is voluntary. You do it because it is spiritually helpful. And you also do it because, again, what works for your health? It's a big thing, is don't do something that's going to be unhealthy. But one thing I've found, even just with the very light form that I do, is you are, again, particularly mindful of saying no to yourself, not just at a couple points through the day, throughout the day. Particularly if I'm working from home and I walk into the kitchen and there's some freshly baked muffins sitting on the oven, or you're walking past that full fridge and it's 4:30 and your stomach is rumbling. But makes you particularly mindful of it. And then the other thing it does is one of the things we've talked about in Lent is trying to slow down a little. Well, the fact is, if you cut a bunch of calories out of your day, you do kind of have to slow down a bit if you don't want to be a wreck by dinner time. And then the other thing that it does is it does also, I find, it makes you mindful of others who are in need. Because every time you start to feel like a little sorry for yourself, that, oh, man, I really want that. You end up thinking about, well, there's all kinds of other people who don't have the choice to break their fast today. There are people out there who are giving up lunch so that their kids can have lunch to go at school. It makes you feel mindful of others. And the other thing that I found is again, surprise, surprise, this is a spiritual practice not just endorsed by the Christian tradition, but by basically almost every religious tradition in the world, is that it leads to richer prayer. Again, something that happens the longer you do it, either over intervals or for a longer fast. But there's something about intentionally choosing weakness, where we open ourselves up more to the God who is our real strength. To the God who, again, we say in the Lord's Prayer all the time, He is our daily bread. And that's, again, where this whole idea of saying no to ourselves opens us up to say yes to so many other things. And that's what all of this comes down to. It comes down to laying something down in order to take up the way of Jesus. The way that leads to life for ourselves and others. The way that empowers us to truly love our neighbors with the sacrificial love we see in Jesus and truly love God with everything that we are. And so however you do it, whether you're already doing something for Lent or haven't yet, but there are 2 weeks left to go, consider either what you're doing or what you might just try, even one day, one thing. Because there is power in saying no to ourselves. When we're doing it to say yes to Jesus, and yes to his way, yes to others, and yes to our God. May the Lord give you guidance and strength to say no to yourself, take up the cross, and follow the one who leads us to the real life, to the best life, to eternal life, this day and every day.